Can you grab those trays before the guests start arriving? Those were the first words my mother said to me after 18 months overseas. Not welcome home, not how was your deployment, not even it's good to see you. Just trays. I was still standing near the front entrance of the Kensington estate with a duffel bag hanging from one shoulder and my navy dress uniform wrinkled from 2 connecting flights and a 3-hour drive from Norfolk. My mother barely looked up from her phone. Eleanor catering charges by the hour, she said. If they're behind schedule, we're the ones paying for it. Then she walked away. I watched her disappear into a crowd of decorators carrying flower arrangements that probably cost more than my first car. For a second, I just stood there, not because I was hurt. Honestly, after 15 years in the military, hurt wasn't the problem anymore. The problem was familiarity. Nothing had changed. The waterfront estate looked exactly the same. The polished marble floors, the oversized windows facing the harbor, the family portraits strategically positioned to remind visitors how important the Kensington name supposedly was. Everything looked frozen in time. Everything except me. I set my duffel bag beside the staircase and unbuttoned my dress coat. The catering manager spotted me immediately. Thank God, he said. Are you family or staff? I almost laughed. Good question. He laughed too. I didn't. By the time he realized I was serious, I had already picked up a tray of champagne glasses. A young waiter beside me whispered, "You don't sound like staff. I don't think my family would agree." That earned me a nervous smile. The house was preparing for one of my parents' social gatherings, not a charity event, not a fundraiser, just another excuse for wealthy people to stand near expensive boats and tell each other how successful they were. The guest list sat on a table near the kitchen. I glanced at it while carrying a tray. 47 guests, 3 state senators, 2 defense contractors, a local television personality, and about 20 people whose main qualification seemed to be having enough money to be invited. My father loved that sort of thing. Alistair of Kensington measured friendships the same way bankers measured investments. Every relationship had a projected return. I carried glasses into the main hall. Nobody recognized me, or maybe they did and simply didn't care. Either option felt equally possible. At 3:16 p.m., I heard my younger sister's voice before I saw her. Celeste had somehow turned speaking into a performance art. Every sentence sounded like it expected applause. Oh my God, the engagement photos are unbelievable. A group immediately gathered around her. I stayed near the wall, not hiding, observing. People often reveal more when they think nobody important is listening. That habit had kept me alive more than once. Celeste looked exactly as social media described her. Perfect hair. Perfect makeup, perfect smile, the kind of perfection that required 3 assistants and several $1,000s every month. She spotted me from across the room. For a brief moment, I thought she might be happy to see me. Instead, she pointed toward a stack of gift boxes. Meredith, could you move those somewhere else? No hello, no hug, just another task, I nodded. Sure. Her attention returned to her audience immediately. The conversation continued as if I were a member of the furniture. That wasn't new either. Growing up, Celeste had always been the center of attention. I was the reliable backup plan. She received praise. I received responsibilities. She broke things. I fixed them. The arrangement worked well for everyone except me. As I carried the boxes toward a storage room, something caught my eye. A framed engagement photograph sat on a nearby table. Celeste stood beside a tall man wearing a dark suit. Confident smile, strong jaw, military posture. The photograph looked professionally staged, but it wasn't the photo that stopped me. It was the challenge coin sitting beside the frame. Most people wouldn't have noticed it, a simple bronze coin displayed in a small acrylic case. But I recognized it immediately. Every detail, every engraving, every scratch. My hand froze. That coin wasn't supposed to be there. Not in this house. Not beside that photograph. Not anywhere near my family. I picked up the frame. The man in the photo stared back at me. For the first time all day, I felt something shift, not fear. Not anger, something colder, more focused. The kind of feeling that appears when a detail doesn't fit where it should. I turned the frame over, no name, just a handwritten note from Celeste. Forever starts, now, love, Logan, Logan. The name meant nothing to me, the coin did. And the fact that he possessed it raised questions that shouldn't have existed. Questions I couldn't answer yet. Questions that made my pulse slow instead of speed up. Years in command had taught me something important. When something impossible appears in front of you, don't react. Observe. Collect information. Wait. I set the frame back exactly where I found it. Then I stepped away. Across the room, Celeste laughed loudly as another group gathered around her. My parents looked happier than I'd seen them in years. Whatever this engagement was, they clearly viewed it as a social victory. I watched them from the edge of the room while servers moved between guests carrying trays of champagne. Nobody noticed me. Nobody asked about the deployment. Nobody mentioned the 18 months I had spent away. And strangely enough, that no longer bothered me. Because my attention had shifted somewhere else. Toward a bronze challenge coin. Toward a man named Logan. And toward a question that refused to leave my mind. How did he get that coin? Because if my suspicion was correct, that small piece of metal was connected to a decision I had made 6 months earlier. A decision that destroyed a military career. A decision whose consequences were supposed to be buried permanently. Yet somehow that story had just walked into my family's house. And before the evening was over, I intended to find out exactly why. I left the photograph where it was and took my seat at the far end of the dining table. The Kensington dining room could comfortably fit 20 people, even though there were only 8 seats occupied that evening. My father liked excess. Empty space made everything look more expensive. A crystal chandelier hung overhead, throwing sharp reflections across polished silverware and imported wine glasses. Somewhere between the third bottle of Napa Valley Cabernet and the second course, the conversation shifted exactly where I expected it to Celeste, more specifically to Celeste's fiancé. "Oh, wait until Logan gets here," she said, practically bouncing in her chair. "You guys are going to love what happened this week." My mother smiled immediately. My father leaned forward. I took a sip of water. Showtime. Celeste pulled out her phone and opened a photo. "He can't tell me much. It's because of security clearance, obviously. "Of course," my mother said. "But apparently he's working with people at the highest levels now. Pentagon-level projects." My father looked impressed. "That's extraordinary." I almost choked on my water. Not because the claim was ridiculous. Because it was familiar. I've spent enough years around military circles to know that truly important people almost never advertise how important they are. The louder someone talks about classified work, the less likely they are to actually have access to it. But nobody at that table wanted reality. Reality wasn't glamorous. Reality didn't generate social status. Fantasy did. Celeste continued. "He's always so humble about it." That sentence nearly deserved an award for comedy. I only found out because one of his former teammates accidentally mentioned it. Former teammates. Interesting choice of words. My father nodded approvingly. That's the mark of real leadership. I stared at my water glass. The irony was becoming physically exhausting. The server placed a plate in front of me. Herb-crusted sea bass. I thanked him. Nobody else noticed. The conversation had become the Logan Cross Appreciation Society. "Do you know how hard it is to become a Navy SEAL?" Celeste asked dramatically. My mother shook her head. "I can't even imagine. Less than 20% make it through training." The number wasn't even accurate. But accuracy had already left the building. My father glanced toward me. "Is that true, Meredith?" The first question directed at me all evening. I looked up. "SEAL training standards change over time." A technically correct answer. My father frowned. "Well, Logan obviously made it, apparently." Celeste rolled her eyes. "Why do you always sound skeptical?" "Because I've signed paperwork that would ruin your evening." Instead, I smiled. "Just listening." She seemed disappointed that I wasn't taking the bait. Then again, she probably expected me to be jealous. That was always the family explanation whenever I failed to worship someone they liked. Not disagreement, not concern. Jealousy, the universal answer to everything. My mother suddenly turned toward me. "You know, Meredith, you could learn something from Logan." That got my attention. "Really?" "Absolutely." She took a sip of wine. "He knows how to present himself." There it was. The family religion. Presentation. Not character, not integrity. Presentation. My father joined in. "Your military career has always been respectable." Whenever my father used the word respectable, bad news followed. But let's be honest. Nobody really understands what you do. I nodded slowly. That part was true. Most people didn't. They weren't supposed to. Logan's achievements are easier for people to appreciate. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked a question. What achievements would those be? The table went quiet for half a second. Then Celeste jumped in. "Seriously? I'm asking." She leaned back. "Operations." "Which operations?" "Classified." Convenient. My father chuckled. That's why they're classified, Meredith, apparently. I pushed a piece of fish across my plate. The conversation continued. Every story became bigger than the one before. According to Celeste, Logan had advised generals. According to my mother, he was probably destined for government leadership. According to my father, men like Logan shaped the future of national security. The actual Pentagon would have been fascinated to learn this. I checked my watch, 8:42 p.m. The challenge coin remained in the back of my mind. The details kept bothering me, not because of what I knew, because of what I didn't know. Someone like Logan shouldn't have access to that coin. There was a missing piece somewhere, and missing pieces usually mattered. A lot. The waiter began clearing plates. Dessert arrived. A chocolate tart from some bakery my mother never stopped talking about. I recognized the box from the kitchen. The receipt was still attached. $312 Rs and 48s. For 6 tarts. The military had sent me into active combat zones with less financial recklessness. Then Celeste delivered the statement she'd clearly been saving all night. We're thinking about having Logan speak at the Naval Defense Gala next month. My father smiled proudly. Excellent idea. My mother practically glowed. People need to hear his story. His story. That phrase landed differently, because I knew something they didn't. Stories only work when nobody checks the records. I looked around the table. Every face reflected admiration, not one question. Not one doubt. Not one request for evidence. Just blind acceptance. Because Logan looked the part. Expensive suit, military buzz cut, confident smile. That was enough. In my parents' world, appearance created truth, not the other way around. And suddenly, something became painfully clear. The problem wasn't Logan, not entirely. Men like Logan existed everywhere. The real problem was the audience willing to believe them. People desperate to stand near prestige. People willing to ignore facts if the fantasy sounded impressive enough. People like my parents. People like Celeste. I leaned back in my chair and watched them celebrate a man who hadn't even arrived yet. The room felt strangely familiar. Not like home. Like a briefing room before an operation. Everyone focused on the wrong target. Everyone missing the threat sitting directly in front of them. And somewhere outside, tires rolled across the long driveway leading toward the estate. A car door closed. Voices carried through the entrance hall. Then I heard a man's laugh. The sound reached the dining room a few seconds before he did. I didn't need to look toward the doorway. Something told me exactly who had just arrived. Then the room reacted before I did. Celeste jumped to her feet. My mother's smile widened. My father straightened his posture like a senator preparing for a campaign photograph. And a moment later, Logan Cross walked into the dining room. The first thing most people noticed was confidence. The second thing they noticed was money. His charcoal suit was custom-tailored. His watch probably cost more than a junior enlisted sailor earned in 3 months. Every detail had been carefully selected to project success without appearing desperate. The funny part was that the effort itself was desperate. People who genuinely belong somewhere don't spend that much energy proving it. Logan moved around the room shaking hands and smiling. Not normal smiles. Calculated smiles. Each one adjusted slightly, depending on who stood in front of him. Older guests received respect. Wealthy guests received admiration. Women received charm. Men received confidence. It was like watching a salesman switch presentations every few seconds. And judging by the reactions around the room, business was booming. There he is, my father announced. Logan laughed modestly. Sorry I'm late. You made it, Celeste said, wrapping her arms around him. I had a call run long. My mother immediately looked impressed. Pentagon? Logan hesitated for half a second, then smiled. You know how it is. No, nobody at that table knew how it was. But that answer worked anyway. My father laughed. National security can't wait. Logan nodded as though that statement made perfect sense. Then he began performing, because that's what it was, a performance. Within 3 minutes, he had somehow mentioned a retired admiral, 2 defense consultants, and a deputy secretary whose name he pronounced incorrectly. Nobody noticed. I did. He spoke with the confidence of a man who knew his audience wouldn't verify anything. That confidence is surprisingly common. It's amazing how many lies survive simply because nobody wants to interrupt a good story. I stayed quiet. Logan continued. There was this operation in the Mediterranean a few years ago. I nearly smiled. Here we go. The details are still sensitive. Of course they were, but let's just say things got complicated. My father leaned forward. What happened? Logan lowered his voice dramatically. The team got pinned down, no location, no mission profile, no timeline. Just vague movie trailer language, perfect for civilians, disastrous for anyone who had actually served. We had to improvise. My mother looked horrified. That sounds terrifying. It wasn't ideal. That answer earned admiration around the table. Apparently surviving an imaginary operation was impressive. Then Logan launched into another story, then another. Each one larger than the last. Each one placing him at the center of some heroic accomplishment. I watched him carefully, not the words, the behavior. People reveal themselves through habits. His right hand kept touching his watch. His left thumb rubbed the edge of his wedding band every few seconds, a nervous tell. His shoulders stayed loose, his jaw remained relaxed. That part was genuine. He had told these stories many times before. Practice creates confidence. Even when the material is fiction, then it happened. His eyes finally reached the end of the table and landed on me. The change lasted less than a second. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. I did. A tiny hesitation. A brief tightening around his eyes. The slightest interruption in his breathing. A flash of recognition. Then it disappeared. His smile returned immediately. Professional, polished, controlled, but not fast enough. Because I recognized him too, completely. 6 months earlier, he had been standing in front of an investigative review board. Different suit, different attitude, same face, same eyes, same habit of pretending consequences only happened to other people. Logan Cross. Former special warfare operator, former. Not current, not active, not classified, not Pentagon, former. The challenge coin suddenly made sense. Not all of it, but enough. My mother interrupted my thoughts. Logan, have you met Meredith yet? That question almost made me laugh out loud. Logan answered first. We've crossed paths, crossed paths. An interesting description for a man whose discharge papers carried my signature. I extended my hand, he shook it. Firm grip, slightly damp palm. There it was. The first real thing I'd seen from him all night. Fear, not much, just enough. Nice to see you again, I said. His smile tightened. You too, nobody else noticed. Celeste certainly didn't. She was too busy staring at him like he'd personally invented oxygen. You never told me you knew each other. Logan released my hand. Military circles can be surprisingly small. That was technically true. The military can feel very small. Especially when your career explodes publicly. My father laughed. That's incredible. Not really. The incredible part was watching Logan maintain composure. Most people would have started sweating immediately. Logan was smarter than most people. Dangerously smarter. He understood the situation instantly. He knew I recognized him. He knew I knew the truth, and he also knew something else. I wasn't exposing him. Not yet. That uncertainty was probably bothering him more than an argument would have. The dinner continued. Conversation moved around the table. Wine bottles emptied. Dessert plates disappeared. But every few minutes I caught Logan looking toward me. Checking, measuring, trying to calculate what I knew, trying to predict what I would do. The problem for him was simple. I wasn't sure what I was going to do either. Not until I understood the entire picture. Because one question still bothered me. The same question that started when I saw that challenge coin. How had a disgraced operator managed to transform himself into my sister's celebrated war hero? That kind of reinvention doesn't happen by accident. Someone had helped build the lie. Someone had financed it. Someone had benefited from it. And as Logan raised a glass and accepted another round of admiration from my family, I became certain of one thing. The fake military stories weren't the real problem. They were only the surface. Whatever Logan was hiding ran much deeper than wounded pride and inflated credentials. Across the table, he laughed at something my father said. Everyone laughed with him. I didn't, because I had seen the version of Logan Cross that never appeared in engagement photos. The version without the expensive suit, without the practiced smile, without the audience. The version that surfaced when people's lives depended on him. And failed. The memory arrived with uncomfortable clarity. Not because I wanted to revisit it. Because some mistakes leave fingerprints on your mind. You don't forget them. Especially when 3 people almost die. The operation had taken place 8 months earlier in the Persian Gulf. I was serving aboard the USS Hartford as commander of a joint special operations task force overseeing multiple maritime interdiction teams. Most people hear words like special operations and imagine action movies. The reality is paperwork, planning, logistics, intelligence reports, risk assessments, communication protocols, and long stretches of waiting interrupted by moments that can destroy lives in seconds. That mission started with intelligence about an arms smuggling network using commercial shipping routes. A cargo vessel operating under a false registry had become our target. The boarding operation was scheduled for just after midnight. I remember reviewing the final operational packet at 11:18 p.m. Weather conditions were deteriorating, sea state increasing, visibility poor. None of it was ideal. The assault teams launched anyway. The objective was straightforward: board the vessel, secure the crew, search the cargo compartments, collect evidence. Nobody expected heroics. The best operations are usually boring. Then Logan Cross decided boring wasn't good enough. Even back then he had a reputation. Talented, physically capable, ambitious. Too ambitious. Several team leaders had already documented concerns about his decision-making. Nothing severe enough for disciplinary action yet. But the pattern existed. Logan always seemed more interested in being the hero than being part of the team. That difference matters. A lot. At 12:41 a.m., the assault element successfully breached the vessel. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Communication traffic remained calm. Status reports were routine. Then one transmission changed everything. A team leader issued a direct order: hold position, wait for secondary clearance. Simple, clear, standard procedure. Logan ignored it, not accidentally, not because he misunderstood. He simply chose not to obey. Later he would claim he believed he had identified a high-value target. That explanation sounded impressive until investigators compared it against helmet camera footage. The footage showed something else. Impatience. Ego. A man chasing a personal victory. Logan separated from his assigned position and pushed deeper into the vessel without authorization. That decision created a chain reaction. The rest of the team suddenly faced a choice: follow protocol, or follow the operator who had just broken formation. Neither option was good. Inside the Combat Information Center, we immediately saw the problem developing: additional movement, communication delays, conflicting position reports. My operations officer looked at me. He's gone off script. I picked up the headset, confirm operator identity. The answer came back almost immediately. Cross. Of course it was. For the next 6 minutes, everything became chaos. Not movie chaos, real chaos. Confused radio traffic. Incomplete information. People trying to solve multiple problems simultaneously. One operator slipped while moving between compartments. Another lost communication for nearly 90 seconds. A third became isolated behind a sealed security door. Any one of those situations could have ended in fatalities. All because one man wanted to be first. I remember staring at the digital vessel skits displayed on the operations screen. Every blue icon represented a teammate. Every movement mattered. Every mistake multiplied. The team leader finally regained control of the situation. The vessel was secured. No cellular fatal, no permanent injuries. Mission completed. On paper, that sounds successful. It wasn't. Because success wasn't the standard. Trust was. And trust had been destroyed. The investigation began less than 48 hours later. Evidence accumulated quickly. Helmet camera recorded, radio transcripts, witness statements. The facts weren't complicated. Logan violated direct orders. Logan compromised team safety. Logan prioritized personal recognition over mission integrity. The hardest part wasn't determining what happened. The hardest part was accepting what had to happen next. People imagine military discipline as emotionless. It isn't. Every disciplinary action affects real lives, real families, real futures. I reviewed the final findings for nearly 3 hours before signing anything, not because I doubted the evidence, because I understood the consequences. A trident isn't just a badge. People sacrifice years to earn it. Careers, marriages, physical health. Entire identities become attached to it. Removing one is never taken lightly, but keeping someone in uniform after they betray their team is worse, much worse. The signature took less than 2 seconds. Commander Meredith Kensington, approved. Dishonorable discharge proceedings authorized. Career over. Decision final. I remember Logan's face during the review hearing, not angry, not ashamed, confused, as if consequences had somehow violated an agreement he thought existed, as if talent should exempt him from accountability. That expression stayed with me, and now it sat across from me, eating chocolate tart in my parents' dining room. Only now the confusion had been replaced with confidence. Reinvention was apparently working well for him. My father raised another toast, to Logan, Glasses lifted around the table. Mother smiled proudly. Celeste looked completely captivated, and Logan accepted their admiration like a king accepting tribute. Nobody there knew about the operators he abandoned. Nobody knew about the investigation. Nobody knew about the hearing. Nobody knew that the future they were celebrating had been built on a lie. I watched him raise his glass. And for the first time that evening, I understood something that made my stomach turn. Logan wasn't just hiding from his past. He was profiting from it. Every compliment, every business contact, every invitation, every opportunity. All of it rested on a foundation created by the teammates he had endangered and the reputation he no longer deserved to wear. And judging by the confidence in his eyes, he believed that past had been buried permanently. The problem for Logan was simple. I knew exactly where it was buried. What I didn't know yet was how much of my family was standing on top of it. Dinner ended a little after 10 p.m. Guests drifted into smaller conversations throughout the house. My mother escorted a few friends toward the waterfront patio, while my father disappeared briefly to refill his glass. I was helping one of the servers stack empty dessert plates when I heard my father's voice. Meredith. I looked up. His expression carried that familiar executive tone. Not father, chairman of the board. Come to the study, we need to discuss something. That phrase rarely led anywhere good. I handed the plates to the server and followed him down the hallway. The study sat on the opposite side of the estate, overlooking the marina. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls. Most of the books looked decorative rather than read. My father closed the door behind us. A second later, my mother entered. Then Celeste. Interesting. An audience, or maybe an intervention, either way. This wasn't accidental. I remained standing. Nobody offered me a chair. My father sat behind his desk and folded his hands, the same posture he used during business negotiations. We have an opportunity. There it was. Not how are you? Not it's been 18 months, an opportunity. I waited. My father slid a folder across the desk. A glossy corporate presentation, Cross Strategic Solutions. The logo alone looked expensive. I opened the folder. 32 pages, professional branding, market projections, defense consulting services, government contracting goals. Projected first-year revenue, $8.7 million. Projected growth, $22 million by year 3. Ambitious, very ambitious. Especially for a company whose founder shouldn't have been anywhere near government contracts. Logan started the firm 4 months ago, my father said. I continued reading. Several sections immediately caught my attention. Military expertise, operational leadership, strategic advisory services. Interesting claims, very interesting. My mother smiled. Isn't it impressive? I closed the folder. What exactly do you need from me? Nobody bothered pretending anymore. My father leaned back. We need your endorsement. Straight to the point. At least that was refreshing. What kind of endorsement? Professional. That answer told me everything. I looked directly at him. Be specific. His jaw tightened slightly. Logan is currently pursuing a state security modernization contract. There it was. The real reason for this meeting. The procurement committee values military credibility. My father tapped the folder. Your name carries weight. Not at home, apparently. But suddenly it carried weight when money entered the conversation. Funny how that worked. My mother joined in. It would only require a recommendation letter. Only. I almost smiled. People who say only usually have no idea what they're asking. A recommendation letter stating what? That Logan possesses the necessary operational experience and leadership credentials. The room became very quiet, because now we had arrived at the actual request. Not support, not assistance. Fraud. My father misunderstood my silence. He assumed I was considering it. Meredith, this contract is worth several $1,000,000. I nodded. I'm aware. Cross Strategic Solutions could become one of the leading firms in the region. I nodded again. I'm aware of that too. My mother leaned forward. Think of what this could mean for the family. There it was. Family. The word always appeared when someone wanted something. Never when I needed something. Never during deployments. Never during missed holidays. Never during hospital visits after operational injuries. But suddenly family mattered when signatures were required. Celeste crossed her arms. Her patience was clearly running low. You should be happy for us. I haven't said otherwise. You don't sound happy. I haven't said that either. That irritated her immediately, because certainty is easier to argue against than calm. You've been judging him all night. I looked at her. No. Then what have you been doing? Observing, evaluating, remembering. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I shrugged, listening. My father exhaled heavily, the way executives do when employees become inconvenient. Let's stop dancing around the issue. That sounded promising. You have connections Logan needs. Connections. An interesting description for federal oversight, military ethics regulations, and procurement law. We're asking you to help him. I studied his face, really studied it, not the words, the motivation. For most of my life, I believed my father cared about appearances because he enjoyed status. Sitting there, I realized something different. He needed it. The way some people need approval. The way some people need attention. Prestige wasn't a hobby for him, it was oxygen. And Logan represented an unlimited supply. My mother spoke next. If you support him, everybody benefits. Everybody. Except the taxpayers, except the procurement committee, except the people relying on truthful qualifications. Minor details, apparently. Then Celeste finally said what everyone else was thinking. Unless this is about jealousy. The room fell silent. Even my father looked uncomfortable, not because the accusation was unfair, because it was useful. Jealousy was their favorite explanation. It simplified everything. Do you think I'm jealous? She nodded. Honestly, maybe. I almost laughed. Not because it hurt, because it was absurd. I had spent 15 years leading operators in some of the most demanding environments on Earth. Meanwhile, Logan was playing military dress-up in front of investors. The comparison wasn't insulting. It was entertaining. Celeste continued. If your bitterness cost Logan this funding opportunity, don't expect us to forget it. There it was. The threat. Finally. My father didn't stop her, neither did my mother. Which meant they agreed. Celeste's voice hardened. You'll be choosing this. This? Being excluded. I looked around the room. 3 people, same last name, same blood. And not one of them had asked whether the request was ethical, only whether it was profitable. At that moment, another story came to mind, not because it was identical, because it carried the same warning, a different family, a different lie, a truth that eventually detonated everything around it. If you've been following this channel for a while, you might remember that case. And if not, keep an eye on the top right corner of your screen between minutes 45 and 55. The similarities become impossible to ignore. I looked back at my father, at my mother, at Celeste, then at the folder sitting on the desk. Cross Strategic Solutions, the future they wanted me to bless. The future they wanted me to help build. A future resting on foundations none of them had bothered to verify. And for the first time all evening, I realized something that made the entire conversation far more dangerous. They weren't asking me to trust Logan. They were asking me to lend him my credibility. Because somewhere along the way, Logan had convinced them that my reputation was just another asset he could borrow. I carried that thought with me upstairs. The house had finally gone quiet. Most of the guests had left by then. The remaining few were lingering near the marina, with glasses of wine and exaggerated stories about golf scores and investment returns. I closed the door to my childhood bedroom and locked it. The room looked almost exactly the same. My mother had preserved it like a museum exhibit. The shelves, the photographs, the furniture. Even the faded rowing medal from high school still sat exactly where I'd left it years ago. Nothing had changed, which felt appropriate, because nobody in this family seemed interested in reality, only appearances. I set my garment bag on a chair and pulled a hardened military laptop from my duffel. Technically, it wasn't classified equipment, but it was configured for secure access and encrypted communication through authorized government systems. I connected a secure authentication device and entered my credentials. 3 verification screens later, the system loaded. 11:47 p.m., the glow of the screen illuminated the room. I opened the folder from Cross Strategic Solutions. Then I opened several procurement databases. At first, I wasn't looking for fraud. I was looking for leverage. There's a difference. Leverage meant discrepancies, exaggerations, inflated credentials. The kind of things people use to make themselves look more impressive. What I found was something else entirely. The first issue appeared 23 minutes later. A certification document, nothing dramatic. Just a supporting credential attached to one of Logan's contract submissions. I almost skipped past it. Then a detail caught my eye. My name, Commander Meredith Kensington. Interesting. I opened the file. A recommendation endorsement, supposedly signed by me. The signature looked convincing. Very convincing. Most people would have accepted it immediately. The problem was simple. I had never written it. I leaned closer. Read every line. The document praised Logan's operational judgment, his integrity, his leadership, his service record. By the second paragraph, I was reading my own counterfeit approval of a man I had personally discharged. That was unexpected. I opened the metadata, creation date, modification history, digital routing path. The document had originated from a private corporate server, not a military network, not a government system, a forgery, a sophisticated one, but still a forgery. I should have stopped there. Most people would have. Instead, I kept digging, because fraud rarely travels alone. And 35 minutes later, the second discovery arrived. This one was worse, much worse. I located the security qualification package attached to Logan's state contract proposal. The document package contained multiple supporting certifications: operational experience validation, security clearance verification, federal compliance review. Everything looked professional until I opened the attachments. My stomach tightened. Not from fear, from recognition. Because I knew exactly what I was looking at. The official command seal, my command seal duplicated, embedded to multiple documents, used as verification authority, used as authentication, used as proof. I zoomed in. Examined every detail. The counterfeit was excellent. The average procurement officer would never spot the difference. Neither would most lawyers. Whoever created these documents had invested serious effort. The realization settled in slowly. This wasn't resume inflation. This wasn't somebody exaggerating war stories at a dinner party. This was federal fraud, real fraud, the kind that attracts investigators, the kind that creates prison sentences. I opened another file, then another, then another. The pattern repeated everywhere. False endorsements, forged validation records. Every road led back to the same conclusion. Logan had built an entire corporate identity using borrowed credibility, mine. I checked the bid summary. Current contract value, under review, $14.6 million. Far larger than the number my father had quoted. That explained the desperation. That explained the pressure. That explained the meeting in the study. My family wasn't chasing prestige anymore. They were chasing money. A lot of money. And Logan needed one thing to secure it. Trust. The one thing he had already lost. So he stole mine instead. I sat back in the chair. For several seconds, I simply stared at the screen. Not shocked, not angry, just thinking, because another question had appeared. How long had this been happening? People don't usually wake up one morning and forge military documentation. That behavior develops, expands, escalates, like a disease. I opened archived submissions, older proposals, older applications, older credential packages. The timeline immediately became clear. 4 months, at minimum, possibly longer. Cross-strategic solutions wasn't built on expertise. Every success, every meeting, every investor, every business opportunity, all of it traced back to fraudulent credentials, and somehow nobody had caught it. Then again, why would they? The documents looked legitimate, the endorsements appeared authentic, and Logan had chosen the perfect shield: me, the quiet daughter, the invisible military officer, the family workhorse nobody paid attention to, someone who avoided social media, someone who stayed out of public arguments, someone who spent more time overseas than at home, someone unlikely to create a scandal. I actually laughed, a short laugh, one without humor, because I finally understood the entire strategy. Logan never expected resistance, not from my family, not from investors, not from procurement officers, and certainly not from me. In his mind, I was predictable. Silent, responsible, contained, the type of person who would quietly absorb the damage to avoid embarrassing relatives. That assumption explained everything. My father wasn't being manipulated, my mother wasn't being deceived. Celeste wasn't being fooled. None of them had asked questions because the answers didn't matter. The fantasy benefited everyone, until reality arrived. I created an encrypted evidence folder, then another, every document, every signature, every seal, every audit record, every metadata trail, saved, archived, backed up, twice. The process took almost 40 minutes. When it finished, the evidence package exceeded 2 gigabytes, far larger than I expected, far more damaging than I expected. Outside my window, the marina lights reflected across the dark water. The house remained silent. My family was sleeping peacefully, probably dreaming about contracts, weddings, and social status, completely unaware that their future had already begun collapsing. Not because of anything I had done, because of what they had done, because every trap requires bait. And every fraud requires accomplices willing to look away. I moved the final file into secure storage and rested my hand on the mouse, perfectly steady. No hesitation, no uncertainty, only clarity. For the first time since arriving home, I could see the entire board. And the most remarkable part was this: I hadn't set the trap. Logan had. My family had simply helped him build it. Now all I had to do was decide when to let the door close. I slept surprisingly well. Not because the situation had improved, because uncertainty had disappeared. There's a strange kind of peace that comes from knowing exactly where the truth is buried. You stop guessing. You stop imagining. You stop wondering whether you're overreacting. The facts do the work for you. I woke up shortly after 7 a.m. and found 23 unread messages on my phone. Most came from work, 2 came from former colleagues, 1 came from a defense procurement officer I knew in Virginia, and 1 came from Celeste. Subject line: presentation guidelines. That sounded promising. I opened it while drinking coffee. By the second paragraph, I nearly spilled it laughing. Not because it was funny, because it was so aggressively ridiculous that it crossed into comedy. The email contained 3 full pages of instructions. Not suggestions, instructions. Apparently, the upcoming Naval Defense Gala at the Willard Hotel in Washington had become important enough to require operational planning. I kept reading: dress code requirements, arrival procedures, photography restrictions, conversation guidelines, social interaction protocols. By page 2, I was half expecting an emergency evacuation map. Then I reached the section labeled Meredith-specific requests. Of course, I leaned back in the chair. This should be good. The first item read: please avoid wearing military uniforms, medals, service ribbons, or anything that may distract attention from Logan's professional accomplishments. I stared at the sentence, then read it again, not because I misunderstood, because I wanted to appreciate the confidence. Apparently existing was now considered a distraction. The second item was even better. Please select a simple dark dress with minimal jewelry and no military identifiers. The third item followed immediately. You may assist mom with personal belongings throughout the evening. Assist. Interesting choice of wording. The fourth item abandoned all subtlety. Please remain several steps behind our group during introductions and networking opportunities. There it was. 3 pages of corporate language designed to say one thing. Hide. Hide your rank. Hide your accomplishments. Hide your identity. Hide anything that might remind people. Logan wasn't the most impressive person in the room. I continued reading. The requests became increasingly absurd. Avoid discussing military operations. Avoid discussing care responsibilities. Avoid discussing procurement oversight. Avoid discussing defense contracting procedures. That one actually made me pause. Very specific. Very revealing. My eyes narrowed. The more I read, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't about social comfort. This was risk management. Someone was trying very hard to control what conversations happened at that gala. Someone was worried. At the bottom of the email, a final note appeared. We all want this evening to reflect positively on Logan's future opportunities. There it was again. Opportunities. Everything always came back to opportunities. Contracts, investors, status, money. I closed the email and stared out the window. The marina below was already active. Workers loaded supplies onto a yacht. 2 maintenance crews inspected dock equipment. Real work. Actual work. Nobody down there cared about appearances. The boat either functioned or it didn't. The dock either held weight or it failed. Reality doesn't negotiate. People do. A knock interrupted my thoughts. Before I could answer, the door opened. Celeste stepped inside. No greeting, no hesitation. Straight to business. Did you read my email? I set the phone down. I did. Good. She sounded relieved, as though compliance had already been secured. I know some of it seems excessive. Some. I just don't want unnecessary complications. I nodded slowly. Complications are exhausting. The irony escaped her completely. She sat on the edge of the desks. I mean it, Meredith. I know, this gala matters, clearly. She crossed her arms. For a moment, she looked almost nervous. Not guilty, nervous, a subtle difference. Then she said something that surprised me. Logan's under a lot of pressure. Interesting. Not pressure from investors. Not pressure from contracts. Pressure. The kind that comes from maintaining something. The kind that comes from protecting something. A story. A reputation. A lie. I kept my expression neutral. What kind of pressure? She looked away, only briefly. People expect a lot from him. That wasn't an answer, that was a symptom. People expect a lot from him. Translation. People might discover things. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because despite everything, part of me could still see the younger sister who used to follow me around the docks asking endless questions about boats. The younger sister who once believed I could fix anything. That version of Celeste had existed. Long before social media. Long before status became her religion. Long before she started measuring human worth by audience size. She stood up. You'll follow the guidelines? There it was. The real reason she came upstairs. Not family, not concern, compliance verification. I looked directly at her and smiled. Not a warm smile, not an angry one. The kind of smile people use when they've already made a decision. Of course, the tension immediately left her shoulders. Thank you. She actually sounded grateful. That part hurt more than I expected. Because she genuinely believed I would make myself smaller to protect her future. She genuinely believed that was my role. Maybe it always had been. For everyone in this family, she moved toward the door, then paused. You know, this could be good for all of us. I nodded. It could. She smiled and left, the door closed behind her. Silence returned. I picked up my phone, opened the email again, scrolled to the bottom, then pressed reply. The response took less than 5 seconds to write. 4 words. I will be there. I hit send, the message delivered instantly. No warning, no argument, no threats, no dramatic speeches. People like Logan often imagine exposure arrives as a fight. They expect confrontation, resistance, anger. What they rarely expect is patience. The gala was still 5 days away. The invitations had already been sent. The investors were already confirmed. The military leadership would already be attending. The stage was already built. And every person involved believed they were walking toward a celebration. I closed the laptop and glanced toward the secure evidence drive resting inside my duffel bag. Thousands of pages, hundreds of files, every forged document, every false credential, every stolen endorsement, safe, verified, ready. Outside, I heard laughter from downstairs. My family sounded happy, hopeful, excited about the future. None of them realized they were already moving exactly where they needed to go. And for the first time since returning home, I felt no urge to stop them. 5 days later, I stepped through the front entrance of the Willard Hotel, carrying my mother's coat over one arm. The irony was almost impressive. A commander in the United States Navy, carrying someone else's designer outerwear, because her family thought it would be less embarrassing than introducing her properly. I glanced around the ballroom. The place was packed. Not with social media influencers. Not with yacht club regulars. People here actually mattered. Senior military officers, defense industry executives, procurement officials, congressional staff, retired admirals, federal contracting specialists. People whose signatures moved budgets measured in hundreds of millions of dollars. People who spent their careers evaluating credibility. Which made Logan's confidence particularly fascinating. The ballroom itself looked immaculate. Crystal lighting reflected off polished marble floors. Servers moved through the crowd carrying silver trays of drinks. Uniforms filled the room, rows of ribbons, service medals, combat insignia. Years of sacrifice condensed into pieces of colored fabric and metal. Most civilians never understand what those decorations represent. The stories behind them, the cost behind them, the people who never came home. Yet somehow Logan was walking through that room pretending he belonged among them. And for the moment, nobody challenged him. Because appearance is powerful, at least temporarily. I adjusted the coat on my arm and followed my family deeper into the crowd. Just as instructed. 3 steps behind, invisible. Exactly where they wanted me. Celeste looked like she was attending her own coronation. Her gown probably cost more than my first deployment bonus. My mother kept introducing herself to strangers who had no idea who she was. My father collected business cards like a man preparing for winter. And Logan was in his element. I watched him work, the same way I watched him at dinner. The same smile, the same stories, the same performance. Only now the audience had changed, which made the lies more dangerous. General Whitaker. Logan shook hands with a retired Air Force officer. It's an honor. The general smiled politely. And what do you do? Logan never missed a beat. I advised several security initiatives connected to advanced operational readiness. That sentence sounded important. It also meant absolutely nothing. A masterpiece of corporate nonsense. The general nodded anyway. Logan continued. I've been fortunate enough to work closely with some exceptional leaders. Then came the name-dropping. Retired admirals, special operations personnel, defense consultants, government advisor. the list kept growing. Every story slightly larger than the last. Every accomplishment slightly harder to verify. Most people listened politely. A few looked genuinely impressed. Others looked skeptical. Those were the dangerous ones. Experienced professionals tend to recognize exaggeration, even when they can't immediately prove it. I remained quiet, carrying coats, holding bags, opening doors exactly as requested. At one point, a Marine colonel glanced toward me. His eyes narrowed slightly. Recognition, not certainty. Just recognition. The kind that happens when someone knows they've seen you before. I smiled politely and continued walking. No need to accelerate the timeline. The timeline was already moving perfectly. At 7:42 p.m., Logan gathered another crowd near the investor reception area. I positioned myself near a service corridor and listened. One investor asked about operational leadership experience, a reasonable question. Logan answered with a fabricated deployment story. Another asked about federal compliance standards. Logan redirected the conversation. A third asked about security validation procedures. That's when things became interesting. Logan smiled confidently. Our credentials have been reviewed by some of the most respected military professionals in the country. True. Just not the way he meant it. He continued. We maintain close relationships with senior command leadership. Also true. Again, not the way he meant it. Then he delivered the line that almost made me laugh. One of my strongest supporters is the commander overseeing major elements of the special warfare community. Several investors looked impressed. One even nodded approvingly. That's a powerful endorsement. Logan smiled. It certainly helps. Yes, it certainly did. Checked my watch, 8:03 p.m. still on schedule. Every phase had a time, every action had a purpose. The evidence package had already been transferred. Legal review had already occurred. Verification had already occurred. Documentation had already been secured. No improvisation required, just execution. That's the parts civilians misunderstand about major operations. The dramatic moment usually isn't the difficult part, the preparation is. By the time an operation becomes visible, the outcome has often been decided. Across the room, Celeste spotted me. She immediately waved me over. I walked toward her. Can you hold this? She handed me a handbag, then another, then her phone. I accepted everything. No argument, no complaint. Her relief was almost immediate, because every time I complied, she became more confident. Every time I remained quiet, everyone became more comfortable. My father approached. Logan's presentation starts soon. His excitement was impossible to miss. You should hear it. I nodded. I'm looking forward to it. That answer made him smile. Because he heard encouragement. What I actually meant was entirely different. The main ballroom slowly filled. Rows of chairs faced a large presentation stage. Massive LED screens stood on both sides. The podium sat directly in the center beneath bright white lighting. Corporate logos rotated across the displays. Cross-strategic solutions appeared every 30 seconds. Professional, polished, expensive. Fraud always looks impressive when properly funded. Guests began taking seats. Military officers moved toward reserved sections. Investors filled the center rows. Procurement officials gathered closer to the front. Exactly the people Logan wanted in the room. Exactly the people who needed to be there. I remained near the back, carrying the final collection of coats. Invisible, forgotten, unimportant. The perfect position. At 8:27 p.m., Logan adjusted his tie and prepared to walk toward the stage. I noticed something new then. A thin layer of sweat along his forehead. Nothing dramatic, just enough. The pressure was finally reaching him. Maybe he sensed something. Maybe instinct was trying to warn him. People often notice danger before they understand it. He glanced across the ballroom. For a brief second our eyes met. The same reaction appeared. A flicker, recognition, uncertainty. Then it vanished. His smile returned, confident as ever, victorious as ever. He turned toward the stage while the audience applauded. I looked down at my watch one final time. 8:29 p.m. right on time. The timeline wasn't just running smoothly anymore. It had entered its final phase. Logan stepped onto the stage to enthusiastic applause. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as the presentation screens behind him shifted to the Cross Strategic Solutions logo. From where I stood near the back wall, I could see almost everyone in the room: investors, military officers, contracting officials, retired commanders, members of Congress, people who had spent entire careers separating facts from fiction. Tonight, they were about to receive some assistance. Logan adjusted the microphone, smiled confidently, and began. Thank you all for being here. More applause. I've dedicated my life to service. A polished opening, pract refined, probably rehearsed 50 times. Leadership isn't about rank, it's about sacrifice. Interesting choice of words. Because sacrifice had never been Logan's specialty. The audience remained attentive. A few people nodded. Others took notes. Several investors watched with obvious interest. Exactly the reaction he wanted. Logan continued. When I served in elite special operations units, I learned lessons that shaped every aspect of my leadership philosophy. There it was, the foundation of the entire fraud. Military credibility, military experience, military trust. Everything depended on that illusion remaining intact. He moved confidently across the stage. Slides changed behind him. Professional graphics, market forecasts, operational diagrams, projected revenue growth. Cross-strategic solutions looked impressive, because lies often do, at least initially. I checked my watch. 8:31 p.m. right on schedule. Logan was entering the section of his presentation focused on credentials. The section that mattered most. The section investors cared about. The section built entirely on stolen credibility. He clicked the remote. A slide appeared showing leadership qualifications, government experience, operational expertise, strategic advisory capabilities. Then came the line. The same line I'd heard all evening. Our work has earned support from some of the most respected leaders within the military community. Several heads turned. People were interested. Names mattered. Endorsements mattered. Trust mattered. Logan smiled. My team maintains relationships at the highest levels of special warfare leadership. There it was. The final step. The point where deception transformed into direct misrepresentation. He looked completely comfortable, completely certain, completely unaware. I pulled my secure phone from my purse. The communications officers assigned to assist with the evidence package had already received all necessary documentation hours earlier. Everything had been legally reviewed. Everything had been verified. Everything had been approved. The only remaining variable was timing. I tapped the screen twice. Nothing dramatic happened. At first, Logan continued speaking. The future of national security requires leaders willing to. The giant screens behind him suddenly went black. The room froze. The audience exchanged confused glances. Technical problems happen at conferences all the time. Nobody seemed alarmed. Yet. Logan laughed awkwardly. Looks like technology is keeping us humble tonight. A few people chuckled. The AV technician near the side wall frowned. He hadn't initiated anything. The screens remained black. 5 seconds, 6, 7. The ballroom grew quiet. Logan's smile started slipping. Then the screens came back to life. Not with his presentation, not with company branding, not with technical diagnostics, with a federal document, large-centered, impossible to miss. The title alone hit the room like a hammer. Official Military Discharge Record. The audience immediately stopped moving. Every conversation died. Every chair became still. Every eye turned toward the screens. Logan's face lost color not gradually, instantly, because he recognized the document before anyone else did. He knew exactly what they were looking at. I watched him take a small step backward. His breathing changed. His shoulders tightened. For the first time since I'd seen him again, the performances disappeared. What remained was the man from the review hearing. The man who thought consequences only happened to other people. The document expanded. Additional pages appeared. Official findings, investigative summaries, authenticated military records. Then came the line nobody in that room would ever forget. A massive red watermark stretched across the screen. Dishonorably discarded. The words alone created shockwaves through the audience. Several investors immediately looked at each other. A retired admiral narrowed his eyes. One procurement official actually stood up. The next page appeared. Additional findings. Grave misconduct. Another page. The silence became absolute. Not confusion anymore. Understanding. That's always the loudest silence. The moment people realize they've been lied to, Logan grabbed the podium hard. His knuckles turned white. No. The microphone carried the word across the entire ballroom. No, that's not. His voice cracked. The audience kept staring. Because the evidence wasn't stopping. The screens displayed authentication records, contract documents, certification audits, digital verification reports. Every forged endorsement, every falsified credential, every fraudulent submission. Then the final page appeared. The page that ended all arguments, all excuses, all performances. At the bottom sat a digital signature. Clear, verified, authentic. Commander Meredith Kensington. The room reacted immediately. Whispers erupted everywhere. People started talking over each other. Questions, confusion, disbelief. The procurement officials looked horrified. The investors looked trapped. The military officers looked furious. Logan looked like a man watching his future disappear in real time. Across the ballroom, I spotted Celeste. She had stopped breathing for a second, or at least it looked that way. Her eyes moved from the screens to Logan, then back to the screens, as though reality refused to cooperate with what she wanted to believe. My father looked even worse. For the first time in my life, Alistair Kensington appeared genuinely lost. Not embarrassed, not annoyed, lost. His entire strategy for understanding people had failed simultaneously. The title, the money, the image, the connections. None of it had protected him from facts. My mother gripped the edge of a chair. Her face had gone completely pale. Logan finally found his voice. This is a mistake. Nobody answered, because evidence doesn't argue. It simply exists. He looked desperately toward the audience, searching for allies, searching for believers, searching for someone willing to rescue him. But the room had changed. 30 seconds earlier, they had seen a war hero. Now they saw a fraud investigation. 30 seconds earlier, they had seen a future industry leader. Now they saw a liability. That transformation was almost physical. Then Logan's eyes found me, standing quietly near the back of the ballroom, exactly where everyone expected me to be. Invisible, unimportant, forgettable. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I started walking forward, and suddenly every head in the room turned in the same direction, toward me. The walk from the back of the ballroom to the front couldn't have taken more than 20 seconds. It felt much longer, not because I was nervous, because everyone else was. The crowd parted naturally. Nobody said a word. Military officers stepped aside. Investors moved out of the aisle. Even the hotel staff seemed frozen. By the time I reached the stage, Logan looked like a man standing in the path of an approaching train. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. Meredith, this isn't what it looks like. That was the first honest thing he'd said all evening, because it wasn't what it looked like. It was worse. I stopped a few feet from the stage. Neither of us raised our voices. We didn't need to. The room was silent enough to hear breathing. Then 2 federal investigators entered through the side doors. That ended any remaining debate. The procurement officials immediately moved toward them. Documents changed hands. Names were exchanged. Procedures began. Logan looked around desperately. The performance was over. The audience had left. Reality had arrived. A hotel security manager quietly approached me. Commander Kensington? The title spread through the room like electricity. Not because people suddenly respected me, because they suddenly understood who I was. I believe your family has been escorted to a private holding room. I nodded. Thank you. The security manager pointed down a hallway. I think they'd like to speak with you. I almost laughed. No, they didn't want to speak. They wanted a rescue. Unfortunately for them, I wasn't bringing one. The VIP holding room occupied a private section of the hotel normally reserved for executive meetings. I opened the door. Chaos greeted me immediately. Celeste was pacing. My mother was crying. My father looked 10 years older than he had an hour earlier, and Logan sat in a chair, staring at the floor. Nobody noticed me enter, not right away, because everyone was too busy blaming everyone else. What were you thinking? My father snapped. Logan didn't answer. My mother pressed a tissue against her face. People are talking about us. Of course they were. That was the first concern. Not fraud, not forged documents, not criminal investigations, people talking. The family priorities remained remarkably consistent. Then Celeste saw me. The room exploded. You did this. The accusation hit the walls hard enough to shake dust loose. Her voice cracked. You actually did this. I closed the door behind me. She pointed toward the ballroom. You humiliated us. Interesting choice of wording. Not him. Us, as though exposing fraud somehow ranked above committing it. I remained silent. That only made her angrier. You've always hated him. No, stop lying. I don't hate Logan. That confused her, because anger would have made sense. Hatred would have made sense. The truth was less dramatic. I simply believed consequences should exist. Celeste shook her head. This is jealousy. There it was again, the family explanation for everything. Jealousy, the universal answer. My father joined in immediately. Enough. His voice carried the familiar executive tone. The same one he used in the study. The same one he used when he thought authority could substitute for facts. You need to fix this. I stared at him. The paperwork. For a moment, I genuinely wondered if I'd misheard him. The paperwork? Yes. He stood up. This is obviously some sort of administrative issue. Administrative issue. Federal fraud, forgery, false military credentials, millions of dollars in procurement deception. Administrative issue. I almost admired the commitment. My father continued. You have rank. There it was, the thing he never respected until he needed it. You have influence. Another thing he never respected until he needed it. You can make some calls. I nodded slowly, then asked the question that mattered. Do you think the documents are fake? The room became quiet. Not because anyone doubted the evidence, because nobody wanted to answer honestly. My father looked away first. That told me everything. He knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Enough to understand. Enough to ask questions he never asked. Enough to ignore those questions anyway, because the rewards looked attractive. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Our name is ruined, not our integrity, not our values, not our choices. Our name. 30 years. 30 years of watching them chase appearances. And somehow we had arrived exactly where that road always leads. Then Celeste stepped closer. Her eyes red, her makeup ruined, her voice shaking. You couldn't stand seeing someone else succeed. That statement hurt, not because it was true, because she genuinely believed it. After everything, she still believed it. I looked at my sister for a long moment. Then I reached for the buttons of the dark coat she had instructed me to wear. Nobody understood why. At first, the room watched silently. One button, then another, then another. The coat opened, and reality finally entered the conversation. Beneath the dark fabric sat my white dress uniform, pristine, pressed, undeniable. The gold shoulder boards of a commander reflected the room's overhead lights. Rows of ribbons crossed my chest, and beneath them sat the silver star. For the first time that evening, nobody had anything to say, not one word. My father looked stunned. My mother stopped crying. Even Celeste froze, because they weren't looking at the family helper anymore. They weren't looking at the quiet daughter. They weren't looking at the person carrying handbags. They were looking at the officer whose signature had ended Logan's military career. The officer whose reputation he had stolen. The officer whose credibility he had forged. The officer they had spent years pretending wasn't impressive enough. I looked at my mother first, then my father, then my sister, and finally Logan. When I was deployed, I said calmly, none of you ever asked what I did. Nobody answered. You never cared about the responsibilities. Silence. You never cared about the sacrifices. More silence. You only cared whether my title impressed your friends. My mother looked down. My father said nothing. For once, there was no defense. No explanation, no excuse. Because the truth wasn't complicated. It never had been. You spent years treating character like decoration. I glanced toward Logan, and eventually someone showed up wearing exactly the costume you wanted to see. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The room simply listened. Because for the first time in their lives, they couldn't hide behind appearances. And standing there in front of them, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even disappointed. I was finished carrying the weight of proving my worth to people who only recognized value after it became useful. Before any of them could respond, another knock sounded at the door. The federal investigators had arrived. And this time, they weren't asking questions. 6 months later, I stood on the docks overlooking the Severn River just after sunrise. The water moved quietly beneath the wooden piers. Fishing boats rocked gently against their lines. A few gulls circled overhead. The air smelled like salt, diesel fuel, and wet wood. For the first time in a very long time, nobody needed anything from me. No investigations, no hearings, no deployments. No family emergencies disguised as obligations. Just water, just mourning, just peace. I slipped my hands into the pockets of my jacket and watched the tide move through Annapolis Harbor. People often imagine peace as something dramatic, a reward, a destination. It isn't. Most of the time, peace is surprisingly ordinary. It's drinking coffee while the world wakes up. It's sleeping through the night. It's no longer rehearsing conversations in your head. It's realizing your phone can ring without your stomach tightening. The Willard Gala had become old news by then, at least publicly. The investigations, however, had continued for months. Unlike social scandals, federal fraud cases move slowly. They also move relentlessly. The evidence trail Logan left behind turned out to be even larger than anyone initially suspected. Financial records, wire transfers, contract submissions, forged credentials, false endorsements. Multiple federal agencies became involved. Once investigators started pulling threads, the entire structure unraveled. The final outcome surprised nobody except Logan. He accepted a plea agreement, federal prison, several years. The exact sentence didn't matter much to me. Prison wasn't the story. The choices that led him there were. Logan had spent years believing consequences were obstacles for other people. Reality eventually corrected that misunderstanding, as it usually does. The business disappeared within weeks. Investors withdrew. Contracts vanished. The company website quietly went offline one Tuesday afternoon. By Friday, most people were pretending they had never heard of cross-strategic solutions. Prestige is funny that way. Everyone wants to stand near it. Nobody wants to stand near the wreckage. My parents learned that lesson the hard way. The waterfront estate sold 3 months after the investigation became public. Technically, they weren't charged with any crimes. Legally, they had protected themselves. Socially, they hadn't. The circles they spent decades trying to impress moved on without them. Invitations stopped arriving. Calls became less frequent. Fundraising dinners suddenly forgot their names. People who once praised them discovered new friendships. That hurt them more than losing money, much more. Last I heard, they were living in a townhouse outside Baltimore. A perfectly respectable home, a perfectly normal life. Ironically, the kind of life they had spent years trying to avoid. As for Celeste, that was harder, not because she lost Logan, because she lost certainty. For most of her life, she believed appearances and reality were the same thing. The scandal shattered that belief. We spoke occasionally, not often. Not comfortably, but occasionally. Healing isn't a movie. People don't apologize once and become different overnight. Sometimes growth looks awkward. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it never arrives at all. I honestly don't know which outcome awaits her. That decision belongs to her, not me. A group of young naval cadets walked past the docks carrying training manuals and coffee cups. One of them waved. I waved back. Most mornings I met with cadets now. Mentoring, teaching, answering questions, sharing mistakes, helping them navigate careers that were just beginning. Retirement still felt strange when people said the word. I wasn't old. I wasn't finished. I had simply reached a point where service looked different. For 15 years, I helped protect national interests. Now I help develop future leaders. Both mattered. One was just quieter. And honestly, I liked quiet. I glanced down at my wrist. The same watch. The same one I had checked throughout the gala. The same one that measured the countdown to a family's collapse. The difference was that I no longer needed it for timing. Only for the hour. The weight was gone. Not the investigation. Not the memories. The weight. The pressure to constantly make myself smaller so other people could feel bigger. The pressure to apologize for competence. The pressure to earn affection through sacrifice. That burden had finally disappeared. I watched the sunlight spread across the water, and I thought about something I wish I had understood years earlier. I spent 15 years in the military, protecting the borders of my country. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to build a border around my own soul. I believed family love was a debt. Something I had to repay by becoming smaller, quieter, less visible. I thought stepping back would help the people I loved shine brighter. I thought sacrificing recognition was the price of keeping peace. I was wrong. The night at the Willard Hotel taught me the most expensive lesson of my life. Human dignity is not negotiable, and respect can never be purchased with unlimited tolerance. When you stay silent in the face of injustice just to preserve harmony, you are not protecting a family. You are feeding the arrogance of people who have started treating your sacrifice as their entitlement. Blood ties are sacred, but they are not a license. They do not give anyone permission to trample your honor, your labor, or the years of your life spent earning what you have built. The truth doesn't need to scream. It doesn't need revenge. It doesn't need a dramatic speech. The truth only needs one person willing to stand upright. Look directly at it and allow the evidence to speak for itself. For years, I believed peace came from being accepted, from being included, from earning a seat at the table. Standing there beside the water, I finally understood something different. Real peace does not come from sitting in the front row at glamorous galas. It does not come from titles, or applause, or social approval. Real peace comes from knowing exactly who you are when nobody is watching, from being able to look at yourself honestly, from refusing to trade your integrity for someone else's comfort. The tide continued moving past the dock. Steady, unbothered, certain of where it was going. I watched it for another minute. Then I turned toward the training center where a new group of cadets was waiting. And for the first time in my life, I walked forward carrying nothing at all. Before you leave this story, take a look at the video waiting on your screen right now. It's one of the most talked about family betrayal stories we've ever covered. And after what happened to Logan and the Kensington family, you'll see why viewers keep coming back to it again and again.